I fully intend this video to be helpful, encouraging, and carry you into the weekend on a high note. All right, well, if you've been listening to my channel for the last few weeks, couple months really, I've been talking a lot about not having despair. In fact, if you want to support this channel in a way that you get something in return, I've got shirts available that talk about no despair. This is one of them. It says no despair on it. I've got another one that's more geared towards this year's election. It says no despair 2020 on it. And the idea is pretty simple. During any election year, there's going to be a certain amount of strife, you might say, anxiety, issues, things of that nature. But especially this year, there's a lot going on and a lot of anxiety, a lot of problems. And for a Christian, we might have concerns and we might want to prepare for what's to come, but we really don't have an excuse to be in a state of despair or full of anxiety or anything like that. Because God is good, right? And God is our master. God takes care of his people. He's got promises for his people. And he actually gives us very simple marching orders. In fact, one of the things that it says about what we're supposed to do is in the book of Micah in chapter 6. And it says, "He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God." Your God, I think it says. Your God or our God. Anyway, walk humbly with God. Those are your marching orders. So you shouldn't have despair. I mean, it's very simple to follow God. And when it says do justice there, it's not talking about some complex, convoluted thing that you need to hire a critical race theorist to come and tell you what's what. It's very simple commands. We're talking about the 10 Commandments and the ways that those 10 Commandments are applied. The Westminster Confession of Faith has a really good section on the 10 Commandments, and it talks about the simple things that God requires of his people. And the reality is, look, there's lots of stuff going on. The stock market is tanking right now. Coronavirus is being blamed for it, but let's just face it, much of the stock market's gains in the last couple of years have been inflated. It's a bubble that just cannot continue. And when something mathematically cannot continue, you can bet that it will not. If it's not possible for something to continue, it won't continue. And so the reality is that whether this is exclusively coronavirus related or if it's symptomatic of something else, this is something that the Bible talks about. God talks about how he deals with nations. In the Bible, it says when God gives the law to Israel, it says, okay, here's what you should do. This is what's moral. This is what's just. This is what's right. And by the way, the reason I'm giving you this land is because the people that were in this land before weren't doing these things. They were being sexually immoral. They were violent. They were stealing. They were haughty, all this stuff. So I kicked them out. And now I'm giving it to you. So be careful that you don't do these things, or the land will spit you out too. Like that's why that's what he says he gave the law for. And this is how God deals with nations. Now, some of my critics like to pretend like I'm talking about how a man is justified before God as far as doing the law and stuff like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how God deals with nations. And so you can bet that whether or not coronavirus actually amounts to much in the United States, whether or not this stock market correction actually ends up driving us into a recession or not, you can bet that there is turmoil in our future as a nation. Whether it's now or later, it's coming. And so knowing that information, you can prepare for what's going to happen. You can prepare your own finances. You can follow God in your own household, obey God with your own stuff. And God will bless that obedience. Because here's the thing, like God gives the law to Israel and he says, look, I'm giving this to you so you can do it and things are going to go well with you. And so if you follow God's rules, if you follow God's commands, if you are moral, you love justice, you love kindness and mercy and stuff like that, and you do it, God's going to bless that. And so that's why there's no despair. So whatever's happening here, look, the stock market's correcting itself. There's opportunities there for the people of God. There's opportunities to see what's happened there and say, okay, with my finances, with my investments, with my economics, my family economics, I'm going to obey God. I'm going to walk humbly with God with what I have, and I'm going to trust him. And that's why we have no despair, because God is completely trustworthy. And he gives us these very simple marching orders, and he blesses his people. It's really just that simple. And so that's why there's no despair. Despite what's happened in the stock market this week, despite what's going on with coronavirus this week, look, prepare for bad times, prepare for lean times. I mean, when God showed Joseph what was going to happen, he said, Joseph, here's what's going to happen to Egypt. And what did Joseph do? He didn't just say, oh, thanks for telling me, God. No, he prepared for it. And he did what he had to do. And so you should do that too. But you shouldn't do it with fear or anxiety. You should do it with thanksgiving to God that he's revealed himself in such a way that his sanctions for nations and the things that happen to nations when they're disobedient and they're haughty and they're evil are predictable. And also that God takes care of his people. I'll leave you with this. No despair, baby. No despair in 2020. By the way, check out a shirt. If you want to support this show and get a cool shirt in return, please consider buying one. Anyway, this is one of my favorite passages from Matthew chapter 6. I think this is a lot of people's favorite passages. Jesus says this to his people. He says, therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and about the body more than clothing? And then he talks about how God, takes care of the birds of the air, he takes care of the flowers of the field. And he's like, guys, you're worth more than a bird. You realize that. And he says this, he says, therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, because tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient is the day for its own trouble. You see, this is why there's no despair. Because what you need to consider is God's given you simple marching orders, right? He's given you simple marching orders, and he wants you to walk humbly with him. And if you do that, he will provide. And we ought to trust him for that. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you next week. God bless.